Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about Superman. Specifically, I'm going to be just picking up where we left off on Superman, which is right after Superman's adventures with Gangbuster. I made a whole video on that. That's going to be linked down in the description below. And if you want and if you don't want to watch that whole video, I'll give you kind of a TLDR on what's happening in Superman at the time, because it's going to be a little confusing without that. So basically, a little over about 9 issues before this, Superman ended up going to a pocket universe. And there he was forced to execute that alternate realities version of General Zod and some other Kryptonian supercriminals. And that really affected him because Superman doesn't kill people. That led him and for a while he was kind of just continuing his life as normal on Earth. But a series of events led to him not trusting himself to be around people anymore, so he decided to exile himself into space. When he exiled himself, though, he had to make sure that everybody wouldn't just immediately find out Clark Kent was Superman, so he left the Kents with a bunch of news stories to send to the Daily Planet. So that's kind of the context leading us into our story today. And our story today is brought to us by quite a few creators, honestly. For the writers, we only have 4, so that's not nearly as many as the artists. So we have these stories were kind of collaboratively written by Roger Stern, Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens, and George Perez. Ordway, Jurgens, and Perez all drew issues of this as well. And then for other artists, we had Kerry Gammill, who drew most of the issues that Roger Stern wrote. We have Dennis Janke, who I think actually might have been inker. Yeah, who typically we see inking over Gammill's work. And then we have Brett Breeding. Brett Breeding is another inker, actually. And and Breeding's probably my favorite of the artists on this. You'll see on the very last part of the story, he just does a standout job. And yeah, overall, this is just a really interesting story. But yeah, I'm only holding up here a couple of parts of it. It's a long-in. I believe it's 14 issues, and there's kind of just a lot going on. There's Superman adventures in space. There's all of the Superman side characters running around still on Earth. There's just all sorts of stuff happening, and honestly, it's a pretty good one. It really does. This story really shows that the creators at the end of the day understood, and still do understand probably, who Superman is and what makes him so good. And honestly, it's a really interesting, these creators strike a really interesting balance between Superman and Clark Kent. And I'll kind of explain what I mean at the end of this, but it is to me it's a really fun distinction. But honestly, I think that's all of the background and the rambling. So let's just hop straight into the story, which today opens on Superman standing on an asteroid, thinking to himself about his personal history, about how Krypton was destroyed and how he came to Earth and was raised by the Kents before he develops his superpowers. And he decided to become Superman, to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. Superman remembers how he ended up on a dead, scarred version of Earth, one which was being threatened by 3 supercriminals, who had killed everyone on that earth. And he remembers how he executed them. He then came back to reality, haunted by his actions, and creating a second persona, the violent criminal, the gangbuster, who he would become as he slept. So, Superman left the Earth, exiling himself from his home, with nothing more than a breathing apparatus and a teleportation harness. Back on Earth, we see Perry White, editor of the Daily Planet, has gotten a news story in the mail from Clark Kent, a story about the criminal enterprise Intergang. Out in space, Clark jumps to a planet, but he finds it completely barren, so he teleports away. Back on Earth, we see Morgan Edge, a businessman who works for Intergang and is pretty high up there, order an assassination on Clark Kent. And next we see Lex Luthor, who is trying to revive the comatose Brainiac and get him under his control. We then see a private investigator who plans to break into Clark's apartment to get info on him. And up in space, we see Superman arrive on another planet. A planet with breathable air and familiar vegetation, and some imminent danger for him to stop, as a plane is crashing. So Superman goes in and saves the plane, but when the people try to make him a hero, he becomes overwhelmed and he runs away, needing to leave. But on Earth, we see that the private investigator is picking the lock to Clark's apartment. But as soon as he gets inside, he's just vaporized by Intergang assassins. Out in space, Superman pops back into reality, and he finds himself all lost in the middle of some mysterious graveyard. So he flies around and he investigates until he is attacked by some creatures. Back on Earth, the police begin to investigate the murder scene in Clark's apartment, and they come to the conclusion that the pile of ash left in the apartment is the remains of Clark Kent. And as the news breaks, Morgan Edge seems pretty pleased with himself. Superman is able to fend off the creatures attacking, and he tries to fly off, but he crashes into a wall which he finds out is alive. And eventually he figures out that he's teleported inside of a giant creature, and he's being expelled like waste. In a LexCorp facility, we see Lex Luthor order Jose Delgado, the first gangbuster, who is currently under the complete physical control of Luthor because of the armor. And Luthor orders him to go to Emil Hamilton, a local scientist, and kill him. But Hamilton is able to use his tech to stop Gangbuster in his track, and with some help, he is able to start getting Gangbuster's armor off. And once Hamilton knows that Luthor is watching him from the armor, he calls up Luthor, and then he hijacks all the TV channels and he just broadcasts the situation live. Basically just to keep Lex Luthor from killing them all, while Hamilton fixes the armor to free Delgado from Luthor's control. Back in space, we see Superman teleport his way out of the creature that he was stuck inside. Superman then pops back in near the inhabited planet he had explored earlier, but he finds that it's completely abandoned. And as Superman investigates, trying to find signs of life, we see Lois Lane, who is down on Earth, is investigating a similar situation in South Dakota. And it's just completely filled with human bones, but that's about it. Superman then sees a familiar trail, so he goes off into space after the unknown threat. Lois Lane is then found by a soldier defending the crime scene that is the town, and he explains that all the destruction was caused by an alien entity that Superman had beaten, but not before it killed everyone in town. Superman then flies into a city-sized starship filled with brains and jars. One of the brains then starts talking to Superman telepathically, and explains that the Wordbringer, the alien guy that Superman had fought in a previous story, was that the Wordbringer had destroyed millions of sentient lives to add them to the Union, the collection of all the brains. But soon Superman comes face to face with the Wordbringer, and they begin to fight. But the Union also hops in, hitting Superman with a psychic blast and allowing the Wordbringer to get away. Soon Superman wakes back up and he starts searching the ship, and he finds the Wordbringer, who has created a new physical force from the collective power of the Union called Eon. And Eon and Superman, well, they scuffle a little bit, they fight. And the whole time, Superman's trying to convince Eon to help him stop the Wordbringer. And soon the fight is taken outside. Superman is then belted through the hull of the ship, straight through one of the brain enclosures. Superman tries to repair the case and save the brain, but he fails. And his attempt to save the brain seems to have an effect on the Union. They think it's really odd. But the Wordbringer pulls up again with Eon, and him and Superman fight for a second time. But Eon gets knocked out, so Superman goes after the Wordbringer. But he is conflicted, not knowing if he should kill the Wordbringer or not. But the Union, sensing Clark's conflict and wanting to repay him for trying to save the brain, offer to use Eon to keep the Wordbringer in check. So Superman kind of just leaves, allowing the Union to govern itself, but saying that he will be back if he hears about the Union being a problem again. Superman then teleports to another planet, but this one seems very calm, filled with prairie lands, and having a breathable atmosphere, but with absolutely no people. Soon Superman gets to work, making himself a house out of clay, and he even begins to farm. And during the days, the work keeps him satisfied, but at night, he only remembers his sorrow. But soon, one of those very same nights, Superman is awoken by a twister, the likes of which he has never seen. One which brings water and completely floods the entirety of the plains, and wipes them out entirely. So Superman decides to leave the planet, since it's not as habitable as it first appeared. But on his way out, he's hit with a meteor storm, and he kind of freaks out, smashing through the meteors. But he comes to the realization that even though he can't trust himself around people anymore, he isn't built for the life of a hermit either. But what he doesn't realize is that his breathing apparatus was damaged. And as a brief epilogue to this story, we see Lex Luthor begin a bid to buy Star Labs, which he ultimately ends up abandoning, sending the global economy reeling, but leaving Lex Luthor with the only part of Star Labs he wanted, being a psychic study plant, so he can better get Brainiac under his control. Back out in space, we see Superman as he hallucinates that he is attacked by the zombie versions of General Zod, Zodra, and Quetzal, who are tormenting Superman before they turn into other villains, like Luthor and Brainiac, before they eventually transition into being Superman, Gangbuster, and Clark Kent, who again torment Superman until he comes to accept that they are all a part of him, that Superman is a part of him. The Gangbuster, as much as he hates the idea, is very much so a part of him, and that Clark Kent is who he truly is, and that they are all necessary for him. So, and that he absorbs all of them into his persona, kind of accepting them before flying away and passing out in space, fully surrendering to his oxygen deprivation, which had caused him to hallucinate in the first place. And Superman is then picked up by a spaceship. Inside the ship, though, we see a bunch of aliens pawing at Superman as he's knocked out, with one even trying to take his cape, which causes him to wake up and start busting heads, because his cape was given to him by Ma Kent. And all the commotion causes the apparent jailers to chain Superman and the other prisoners. And while Superman is detained, we learn that he is being transported to a planet called War World. And soon we see that all of Superman's fighting has gotten him an audience with the King of War, Lord Mongol. Superman is then condemned to gladiator combat on War World. The aliens then do some analysis on Superman to learn that he is a Kryptonian, which is odd to them because they know that Krypton blew up. And we see that this really strikes one of the aliens, who heads straight for his friend, one of the servant girls, named Lentra. And he charges her to take care of Superman while he goes to tell an enigmatic entity known as the Cleric about the news of Superman's arrival on War World. On War World, we see Superman preparing for combat as he gears up in his gladiator garb, he tells Lentra about Earth, about his parents, the Kents. But then again, on the topic of the Kents, he places his cape into his gladiator garb before he prepares to enter the arena. In a completely separate area, we see the alien from earlier come to the cleric and tell him about Superman. And the cleric freaks out, trying to figure out how Superman survived the destruction of Krypton. And back on Warworld, we see Superman is teleported into an arena, where he has to fight another gladiator. After beating him fairly easily, he refuses to kill his opponent, and he is teleported back to his quarters. As Superman rests, he and the cleric begin tales about the history of Krypton, with Superman telling the little bit of history that he knows, which frankly isn't much, but the cleric tells the story of how he came to Krypton personally thousands of years earlier. And he explains that the Kryptonian people had been using cloning technology to clone themselves and harvest the organs from the clones for the original. But the cleric came and started like a religious movement against that practice. And basically there was a whole bunch of other stuff going on with that. Back on Warworld, we see Superman's second bout in the arena, and he is able to once again win fairly quickly. But we see that not only will Superman not kill, but he's also trying to save the lives of his opponents. Back to the following the cleric's story, we see the tensions between the religious of Krypton and the more scientifically minded are starting to heat up, with the scientific base even building a mysterious device known as the Eradicator, presumably to take out the religious. And soon the cleric decides to reach out into Superman's mind using telepathy right before Superman goes into the arena for the third time to face off with the champion. But as they fight, Superman is interrupted by the cleric, showing him images of the great religious scientific wars of Krypton, distracting Superman from the fight until the champion starts hitting him, leading Superman to strike back. But when Superman starts winning, he is once again plagued by visions of Krypton's past. We also see that the cleric is currently in possession of the Eradicator, until Superman snaps out of it and beats the bricks off of his opponent before he challenges Mongol to a fight. And Mongol accepts the challenge pretty quickly, and Superman and Mongol start throwing down, with Superman going to great lengths to keep his opponent from the last fight alive, but Mongol only cares about beating up on Superman. And eventually, when Superman uses his heat vision on Mongol, he gets mad and bashes Superman to the floor before imprisoning him. The cleric then uses his psychic connection to Superman to wake him up, and awake he does, saying, "What? Where? You are at your life's end, Superman. You allotted a single honor, and no prisoner has earned such massive restraints in nearly a century. But you will not be held long immobile, as I promised. Both you and Draga will die by my hand. But Draga shall precede you. Perhaps you two shall meet again in the afterlife. Eventually. You missed. How unfortunate. At this rate, it might take days for me to kill him. No one is dying like that. The heat from your eyes, it's so intense. Then you could have crippled me. Why didn't you? Because I'm not like you. You are strong for your size, but I'm stronger. And I too possess inner fire. Now dance, little one, dance. Your dance has doomed Draga. Oh my god. Ugh. My thanks, Superman. Now I can obliterate you both at once. Don't count on it. Again, he spares my life. Why? Most impressive. Would that you had shown such spirit in the games. I'm no gladiator, Mongol. I use my power to fight for justice, to help the powerless, to stop monsters like you. I've had enough of you. No, not yet. And Superman then goes to free Draga, but Mongol has recovered, and he blasts Superman, but in the very same moment, the cleric has used the Eradicator to teleport Superman to his location. So Superman makes it out scot-free. On Warworld, we see that revolution is brewing, and some of the less public rulers of Warworld decide to appoint the head gladiator as the new chief. Back with Superman, we see him awaken and meet the cleric face to face. The prisoner transport guy then heads back to Warworld, and he heads to the gladiator chambers to free Lentra, but he finds that Mongol has killed her for the kindness that she showed Superman. And Mongol starts slapping around the little alien before the head gladiator arrives and begins scrapping with Mongol. And the little alien gets away, being charged to tell Superman about Draga wanting a rematch. Superman then begins to use the Eradicator, letting it probe into his soul, bond with him, and it creates for him some new clothes, which first manifest as Kryptonian robes. On Warworld, Draga, the gladiator, is able to defeat Mongol, driving him off the planet. Back with Superman, we see that he is able to use the Eradicator to get his classic costume back, before the alien comes and tells him about what's going down on Warworld. And Superman decides to go back and help. But soon after Superman leaves to get back to Warworld, it flies away. So Superman goes back to the cleric, and after getting his body supercharged by reflective panels and the sun, Superman and the cleric use the Eradicator together, using it to relive their past, starting with the cleric, as he apparently caused the deaths of thousands of Kryptonians when he tried to take them all off-world, away from his religious movement off-world, with a bunch of Kryptonians in a thing he called the Ark. But they all freaking just die. And we then see images from Superman's mind, being random at first before focusing on to Jonathan Kent, his dad. And Superman is reminded of who he is, that Pa Kent was a soldier and one who killed people. And soon Superman finds himself back on the dead Earth of the Pocket Universe, where he killed General Zod and the rest of them. And Superman comes into the memory, accepting his past. And the cleric even tells him that there's no other reasonable option for him but to kill them. So the cleric urges him to end his exile and go back to his home, to his family who love him, to be the hero that the Earth needs once again. Most of all, from the cleric's point of view, to claim the Eradicator. And upon fulfilling the cleric's dying wish, Clark shaves, using the Eradicator as a reflection device for his heat vision, before he buries the cleric and heads for Earth, teleporting away using the Eradicator. On Earth, we see Morgan Edge as he learns that the Daily Planet is printing the next part of Clark's story about Intergang under Lois Lane's name. So Edge goes to his boss Darkseid for help, and Darkseid agrees to send a little something to kill off Lois Lane. Inside the Daily Planet, we see Lois, Cat Grant, and Perry White discussing the story, because Cat Grant was Clark's source for all the connections to Morgan's Edge, since she works for him. And then at the main park in Metropolis, we see Matrix, who is currently impersonating Clark Kent, is attacked by a giant purple robot from Apocalypse, and soon it becomes clear that the robot is searching for Lois. So Cat Grant calls Professor Hamilton, and Hamilton asks Delgado, Gangbuster, to jump in and save the day. And Delgado agrees because he kind of has the hots for Lois. So he jumps the robot just as it finds Lois, and he fights it in the street for a few minutes, but it's pretty clear that he isn't a match for the apocalyptic technology, and he's beaten. And soon, Lois and Gangbuster end up near the bottom of a sinkhole in the street. We then see Superman come back to Earth, who has we then see Superman, who has flown back to Earth, and after spending a few minutes enjoying the feelings of being home and catching up with some friends, Superman goes and puts the Eradicator in his apartment. At the Daily Planet, we see that Lois has found a phone at the bottom of the sinkhole, and she calls the planet asking for help. So Jimmy uses his watch to call Superman back for help. Near the top of the sinkhole, we see that the robot is back, stomping around until Superman sees it, and he just starts knocking it around. Superman then orders all the civilians back to back away before he starts really going to town on the robot. And once he knows that it's a completely unmanned machine, he goes all out and destroys it, allowing him to rescue Lois and Gangbuster right before he goes to confront Morgan Edge, who, upon seeing Superman, has a heart attack. And we see that the tabloids are very happy to have Superman back. All right, so for the most part, that's the story. There were a couple of ongoing undercurrents that I kind of just didn't really address. The whole Lex Luthor trying to buy out Star Labs thing, that was a ongoing plot thread for 6 issues. So I just threw a 1-sentence summary in there because it was kind of boring. Another big one is that Matrix, who was Supergirl in the Supergirl saga, and is a weird clone hybrid thing. She physically started impersonating Clark Kent halfway through the story, which is just odd, and didn't really end up affecting anything about the story. So I also just didn't mention that one. But overall, I just think this story, it's good. It's a nice dive into Superman's character, into who Superman is, and what makes him the arguably the greatest superhero in the world. And in universe, Superman is the best of the best. And this story really just highlights what makes him that way. Superman doesn't just he doesn't just take the easy way out on killing off General Zod and the others. He accepts there's big psychological consequences for Superman. And eventually he comes to accept that his own actions, but it takes a toll on him. And I think that this story just really nails Superman. It nails the idea that Superman, that the Superman of this era isn't just Superman, that he's Clark Kent, and Clark Kent wants to be Superman. It's not like the old Silver Age, where it's, I'm Superman and I pretend to be Clark Kent. No, he's Clark Kent and he puts on the costume and then he's Superman. I like how the Superman's cape was used to represent kind of his connection back to home, because Ma Kent made him his cape, and she advised him to never leave home without it. I like that as kind of a nice way of adding in a little touch of Superman's humanity. And yeah, overall, I think this story just really nails Superman. Having him go up against Mongol midway through is also fun. Mongol is kind of an interesting villain in the Superman mythos, because he kind of just shows up randomly from time to time. He is in one of my favorite episodes of TV, and that's the Justice League Unlimited episode, What to Get for the Man Who Has Everything. It's a really, really good episode. Again, if you want a simple distillation of who Superman is, I'd highly recommend watching that episode. It's a really good one. But yeah. So I think having Mongol as an antagonist is good, but I like that for the first few issues, it really is Superman is his own enemy. Like, it's Superman placing himself in dangerous situations. It's Superman ending up in with like finding these random little adventures to go on in space. It something about that just really works for me. And then you have Lex Luthor, like on Earth, like getting bored without Superman as his rival. It's like it's just a really interesting story. The artwork throughout is really good. Brett Breeding and George Perez drew the last issue together, and I think that's by far the best artwork in here. There's like the amount of the motion, the way Superman's face is drawn, everything about it just is. It's just nice in that final issue. The pacing feels fast because of the artwork. It's just really good. And yeah, honestly, I think this story was really, really good. It's long. If you're gonna be reading it, if you read the whole thing, I keep holding up 4 issues. And that's because these are the 4 that I think had some of the best covers. But let's see. So it took up this much space in an album, and I think it's 15 issues, something like that. 13, 14, 15, somewhere in that range. So this is a long story. A really long story, but it's a good one. It's definitely necessary if you're reading this era of Superman. The Eradicator, I know, I'm fairly certain it's somehow related to Eradicator, the character, who will come later, following the death of Superman and the reign of the Superman. I'm pretty sure it's somehow related. It'd be kind of weird if it wasn't, but I don't actually know that for sure. So yeah, but there's some important stuff that goes on for this era of Superman, and it's really interesting. One thing that I don't especially like about this whole post-crisis reboot of Superman is some of his villains are a little lackluster. Like Brainiac, come on. This version of Brainiac just being some bald fat guy with a goatee and he's psychic. Come on, man, it's a little lame. Eventually they do go on to fix that and they make him Brainiac like the robot, but it takes a little bit to get there. But yeah, honestly, that might be all I have on this one. I do recommend it, and you can definitely find it at your local comic book store. Probably most issues will be in the dollar bin, because they just printed a lot of these, and it's a good story. On a kind of more outside the world of comics perspective, I do really like that this issue, Superman's return to Action Comics, is also when Superman returns to Earth. I kind of just like that, because Superman had been absent from the Action Comics title for... Well, Superman hadn't ever been absent from the Action Comics title. The Action Comics title was kind of removed from the Superman continuity so that it could become Action Comics Weekly, which was like this weird hodgepodge, what's the word I'm looking for? It would be 5 stories. It would be like Green Lantern, Wild Dog, Nightwing, 2 pages of a Superman story. Don't ask me why. There would be 2 pages of a Superman story every issue. Really weird era, the Action Comics Weekly. Really weird comic. It'll probably end up getting its own video someday, actually. But Action Comics Weekly was an interesting idea. But this issue right here represented Superman's return to the comic, and I like that it also represented Superman's return to Earth after his self-imposed exile was over. And honestly, I just think that this era of Superman in general, starting with John Byrne's Man of Steel, carrying all the way through all these through lines, it's all really good. Yeah, I think it's just a good era, and I find it that I'd highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun to read. But yeah, overall, I think that's all I've got for today. So I'm just another guy named James. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.